if you follow Stoicism, you're probably already intimately familiar with the archetype of the sage.
Right, the unshakable rock in the storm.
Exactly. The person who, never loses their temper over a delayed flight, who never lies awake at 3 a.m. replaying some awkward social misstep.
And who looks at their own mortality with just this cool, rational detachment.
Yeah, and Seneca, the great Roman philosopher, he basically spent his entire life codifying that exact ideal. I mean, he wrote volumes teaching the rest of us how to achieve that bulletproof state of mind.
He really did.
But today, we are looking at a text that asks a deeply provocative question. What if Seneca completely dropped the act at the end of his life?
It's such a fascinating premise.
Yeah.
The source material we are examining today to answer that question is incredibly creative. It's a fictional, imagined, lost manuscript.
Yeah, and I mean, the historical Seneca did write letters to Lucilius,
Of
obviously.
course, yeah. But this text imagines what he might have written if he just stripped away all the philosophical posturing, all the performance.
Which makes it a brilliant vehicle for exploring the gap between the philosophy we preach and the messy, contradictory reality we actually live every day.
Because it's one thing to write about virtue. It's another to live it when everything is falling apart.
Right. We are going to look at what happens when a lifetime dedicated to rigid self-improvement just collides head-on with undeniable physical human frailty. Okay, let's unpack this.
So the manuscript opens with an admission that feels almost like a betrayal of everything the historical figure stood for.
It really does. It's jarring.
You have this man who spent decades as the ultimate confident authority on virtue. Yet, in this first fictional letter, the aging Seneca tells his friend that he's been learning to be quiet.
Learning to be quiet. Wow.
Yeah. He confesses that after a lifetime of instructing others on how to live well, he isn't entirely sure if he has lived well himself.
Which is a heavy thing to admit.
He looks back at his vast body of work, all those confident moral directives, and he describes it as a magnificent, perhaps necessary, arrogance.
Why do you think a thinker of that magnitude suddenly doubts the foundation of his own life's work? Like, what triggers that kind of retrospective collapse?
Well, he realizes that for decades, he wasn't merely practicing a philosophy. He was performing a role.
Performing.
Right. He was playing the character of the untouchable Stoic sage for an audience. And he warns Lucilius about this concept he calls the shadow side of virtue.
The shadow side.
The premise is that the light of philosophy is meant to illuminate our path, right? But the brighter and harsher that light, the darker the shadow it casts.
So the standard itself becomes the problem.
Exactly. When we hold ourselves to impossibly high, rigid standards of emotional control, that discipline can easily curve into a very toxic form of shame.
Using the philosophy as a weapon against the self?
Precisely. The discipline that was supposed to liberate him instead turned into this harsh, tyrannical inner critic. Seneca realizes he spent his entire adulthood quietly beating himself up for experiencing perfectly natural human emotions.
Just because they didn't align with the theoretical perfection of the sage.
Right.
There is a specific moment in the manuscript that grounds this abstract idea beautifully, I think. Seneca recounts a very mundane incident. He loses his temper at a freedman in his household over a minor accounting error.
He just snaps.
He just snaps. Under his old performative framework, what he calls the shadow response, how would he have typically handled that lapse in emotional control?
Oh, the old Seneca would have been absolutely horrified by the outburst. He would have retreated to his study, harshly berated himself for failing to maintain his stoic tranquility, felt like a complete fraud.
Probably written an essay about it.
Oh, definitely. He likely would have written a stern 10-page essay on the eradication of anger just to overcompensate and prove to himself he was still a philosopher.
And the actual freedman, the guy he yelled at,
would have been a complete afterthought to his own internal moral crisis.
But in the manuscript, he tries an entirely different approach after the outburst, something that feels much more Eastern in its origin.
He does. He practices a concept the text refers to as affectionate awareness. What's fascinating here is that he doesn't try to philosophize the anger away.
He doesn't suppress it.
No, he simply observes it without judgment. He notices the physiological state of his body. He notes that he is tired, his joints ache, he is stressed about court politics, and the anger simply arose from those conditions.
It's cause and effect.
Right. He doesn't justify snapping at the man, but crucially, he doesn't condemn himself as a profound moral failure either. He just sees the mechanism clearly.
And the resolution of the conflict is completely different, too.
Rather than writing an essay to repair his ego, he simply walks out and makes amends to the freedman.
Just apologizes.
Yeah. He doesn't do it out of a rigid philosophical obligation to perform virtue, but out of ordinary, uncomplicated human decency. The manuscript uses a wonderful analogy here.
The puppy one.
Yes. Seneca compares the wandering, flawed human mind to training a puppy. When a puppy wanders off the path, you don't beat it into submission. You just gently, patiently bring it back to where it needs to be.
That is something I want you, the listener, to really let sink in. Consider your own routines, your self-improvement goals, the things you are actively learning. How often do you wield those tools as a weapon against yourself?
It's so common.
When you inevitably act like a messy, reactive human being, do you demand immediate perfection and punish yourself with shame? Or do you apply that gentle, affectionate awareness?
It is an exhausting way to navigate existence, constantly policing your own humanity. And it points to a deeper structural issue within historical Stoicism that the manuscript takes aim at.
The mind-body split.
Yes, the strict hierarchical division between the mind and the body. Traditional Stoicism often teaches that the pure, rational mind is the master, while the flawed, irrational body is merely an indifferent vessel. A true philosopher is supposed to remain completely untouched by physical suffering.
The concept of the preferred indifferent. You might prefer not to be sick, but if you are, your rational soul shouldn't be disturbed by it. How does the fictional Seneca dismantle that specific framework?
The manuscript shatters that wall completely through a deeply visceral experience. Seneca writes to Lucilius about contracting a severe fever. He is lying in his bed, his bones are aching, his temperature is spiking, and his mind is entirely clouded by delirium.
He's burning up.
In that state, he realizes the absurdity of trying to philosophize his way out of biology. He cannot simply tell himself, my rational soul is untouched by this, because his rational soul is generated by a physical brain that is currently baking at 104 degrees.
The biological reality overrides the philosophical theory.
Completely. He realizes that we are not just pristine ghosts temporarily haunting meat suits. We are deeply embedded, embodied consciousness. The brain chemistry is altered, the thoughts become chaotic, and the philosophy simply evaporates.
It just disappears.
And through this suffering, he discovers that the body possesses its own slow, ancient wisdom. A wisdom that the tyrannical, rational mind constantly ignores and overrides in its pursuit of productivity or perfection.
When we are young and resilient, it's easy to treat the body like a machine. We demand performance, we drink another coffee, we ignore the signals to rest.
But aging forces a humility that intellect cannot. As Seneca's body declines in the narrative, he describes days where he physically cannot get out of bed on his own. He has to be lifted by the household servants.
Which is a huge blow to the ego.
Now, the classic Stoic response might be to cultivate a cold, detached indifference to this physical decay. The human ego, conversely, might feel a crushing sense of humiliation at the loss of independence.
How does a man who spent his life preaching ultimate self-sufficiency process, becoming completely dependent on others, to simply stand up?
He shifts away from both detachment and humiliation and moves into profound human gratitude. There is a deeply moving scene detailing a day of severe brain fog. Seneca cannot remember his own complex philosophical framework.
It's all gone.
The intricate mental architecture he built over a lifetime is suddenly inaccessible. He is helpless. And a servant named Claudia brings him a very simple meal of bread and olive oil.
What does that interaction look like for someone who is suddenly stripped of his analytical mind?
Because his conceptual, categorizing mind is effectively offline, he experiences the meal completely unmediated by judgments or preferences. He isn't analyzing the nutritional value or the symbolic meaning of the bread. He just tastes the olive oil with absolute, raw directness.
Wow.
And in that moment of pure sensory presence, he looks at Claudia and recognizes the ordinary grace of human interdependence.
That is a massive paradigm shift. He is no longer the self-contained island.
He realizes that he spent his life writing elegantly about virtue from a position of immense privilege and wealth, locked in his study. Meanwhile, Claudia and the other servants are the ones actually practicing virtue every single day through their invisible, uncelebrated care for a frail old man.
They are the true philosophers of action.
Not theory. It shatters his entire illusion of independence.
Which naturally brings us to the most complex and murky aspect of Seneca's historical reality, which the manuscript tackles head-on. His public life. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was an incredibly wealthy power broker and the primary advisor to the Emperor Nero, a ruler who descended into notorious tyranny and corruption.
Right.
Now, before we go further, to be absolutely clear for you listening, as we discuss this, We're looking at this strictly through the lens of Seneca's internal moral dilemma as written in the fictional manuscript.
Yes.
We're not making any modern political judgments about power, wealth, or complicity. We are not taking any political sides, left-wing or right-wing. We are solely exploring the psychology of a person navigating a compromised system exactly as the authors imagined it in the text.
And the psychological toll of that navigation is agonizing in the text. Seneca admits in his letters that he originally stayed at Nero's court under the justification of harm reduction.
Harm reduction.
He convinced himself that by remaining in close proximity to absolute power, he could be a moderating influence. He could whisper reason into the ear of the emperor and prevent the worst impulses of the regime from becoming reality.
But the manuscript frames that justification as a slow-closing trap.
It does, because every small harm he successfully prevented became a fresh justification to endure the next moral compromise. The rationalization becomes a loop.
You just get stuck.
Eventually, he wakes up to the reality that he is simply tethered to a deeply corrupt machine. He is enjoying the massive wealth and estates granted by the emperor, while effectively providing a veneer of philosophical respectability to a tyrant. This raises an important question, one that the fictional Seneca wrestles with during his sleepless nights. Is it better to remain pure and powerless, maintaining your pristine moral integrity from a safe distance? Or is it better to be compromised, getting your hands dirty in the actual machinery of power, if it means you are potentially useful in preventing greater atrocities?
It is the ultimate unwinnable dilemma. And the tragedy of the narrative is that because he could never definitively resolve that question, he just stayed in the murky middle. Which links to another massive psychological theme in the manuscript, the illusion of tomorrow.
Yes.
How does his compromised political life affect his experience of time?
Because he was trapped in a situation that continually violated his own moral compass, he effectively postponed his actual existence. He spent his entire adult life telling himself a story about the future. He would say, once I finally retire from the court, once the political situation stabilizes, once I have enough security, then I will withdraw to my estates and live the true, pure philosophical life I write about.
It is the trap of the time-binding creature. We constantly project our minds forward, waiting for the perfect, frictionless circumstances to finally start living the life we intend to live.
But the brutal realization hits him at 70 years old. He has run out of tomorrows. The idealized future life he was waiting to begin never actually started. The only life he truly possesses is the messy, compromised, imperfect one he is currently living and has been actively trying to mentally escape.
There is a fantastic contrast drawn in the text that perfectly illustrates the self-inflicted haunting. Paint the picture of his morning anxiety versus his interaction in the garden.
The text describes a morning where Seneca is paralyzed by dread over a tedious, morally compromising political meeting scheduled for that afternoon at the palace. He spends 3 entire hours pacing his study, suffering in his imagination.
3 hours.
3 hours, arguing with phantoms, rehearsing his defenses, entirely consumed by a future that hasn't happened. He misses the reality of his morning entirely.
A ghost haunting his own life.
Exactly. Contrast that prolonged suffering with a brief interaction he has later that same morning. He steps outside and has a 10-minute conversation with a freedman gardener.
Just 10 minutes.
They don't discuss philosophy or politics. They simply talk about the soil, the changing of the season, and the quiet joy of watching plants grow. During those 10 minutes, his mind is entirely synced with his body and his environment. He is fully, vibrantly alive.
So different from the pacing in the study.
The manuscript makes the devastating point that those 10 minutes of ordinary presence contained more actual life than the hours spent agonizing over the empire.
The narrative takes a drastic turn shortly after these realizations. The dreaded future finally arrives at his doorstep. The historical execution order from Nero is delivered, demanding that Seneca take his own life. A forced suicide that historically was framed as a noble, unflinching Stoic exit. How does the fictional manuscript handle this final act?
When the ultimate test arrives, he drops the performance completely. In his absolute final letters to Lucilius, there is no attempt to posture as the fearless sage welcoming death with a stoic shrug. He admits the raw truth of his humanity.
He's honest.
He confesses that he is angry at the senseless waste of it all. He is grieving the imminent loss of morning light, the taste of figs, the conversations with his friends. He admits to a genuine biological terror regarding the physical pain of dying.
And yet, amidst all that messy, contradictory, deeply unstoic emotion, the text suggests he finds a profound state of peace. Here's where it gets really interesting, because that peace doesn't come from philosophical detachment.
No, it comes from a transcendental moment of pure observation the night before his death. The manuscript describes him sitting alone in his garden, watching the moonlight illuminate the stone paths. And in that quiet observation, the terror of death simply falls away.
It just drops.
The following morning, just hours before he is to open his veins, he watches the early light catch the dew on a simple spiderweb.
What is the insight he pulls from the spiderweb? How does it reframe his entire impending death?
He looks at the intricate web, and he realizes that the entity known as Seneca, the famous philosopher, the wealthy courtier, the man with the heavy regrets and the brilliant achievements, is nothing more than a temporary character.
A character.
It is a role he has been playing, a construct of memory and social standing. That character is indeed coming to a violent end, and he allows himself to grieve that ending. But the quiet, unnameable awareness that is currently witnessing the light on the spiderweb, that pure consciousness cannot be cut by a blade. The role is finishing, but the capacity to witness is eternal.
That distinction between the ego character and the observing consciousness completely rewrites his understanding of what he is leaving behind. How does this realization alter his final thoughts on his own legacy? A man who wrote volumes clearly cared about how history would remember him.
It changes everything. He writes to Lucilius about an old mutual friend, Marcus, who passed away 50 years prior. Seneca realizes that Marcus doesn't live on in Seneca's mind as a ghost or a list of accomplishments, but as an ongoing living influence. The warmth of their past friendship still actively shapes how Seneca views the world. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Seneca understands in his final hours that a true legacy has absolutely nothing to do with published manuscripts, marble statues, or meticulously maintaining a perfect historical reputation for virtue.
Legacy isn't the monument you build, it is the unpredictable ripples of genuine connection you leave behind.
It is the moments where you were truly vulnerably seen by another person, and where you extended that same grace to truly see them. It is the small acts of ordinary care, like Claudia bringing the bread. The fictional Seneca comes to the ultimate conclusion that the meaning of life was never found in the exhausting pursuit of philosophical perfection or emotional invulnerability. The meaning is found in simply being awake to the present moment, loving the people around you without your intellectual defenses up, and completely radically accepting our messy, beautiful, flawed humanity.
He stops trying to transcend his humanity and finally just inhabits it. The realization that being fully present for the compromised, imperfect life you actually have is infinitely more valuable than constantly performing for a pristine life you wish you had.
Beautifully said.
And that brings us right back to you listening to this right now. As we wrap up our deep dive into the UMBRA VITAE, we want you to take the ultimate realization of this imagined Seneca to heart. You are already enough.
You really are.
Not because you have finally mastered your habits or achieved your career goals or maintained a flawless image of competence to your peers. You are enough simply because you are a conscious being endowed with the miraculous capacity to witness this strange, beautiful universe.
It is a profound psychological shift, moving away from the exhausting treadmill of seeking validation through achievement and emotional control, and moving toward finding deep meaning through simple, honest presence.
So we want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over today. If the greatest mind of the Stoic tradition, at least in this brilliant fictional exploration, spent his final precious days wishing he had spent less time analyzing life and more time simply feeling it, what part of your own life are you currently overthinking instead of actually experiencing?
It is a question worth carrying with you into the rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep experiencing, and keep seeking those aha moments. We will catch you on the next deep dive.